I see a few familiar faces out there. I see some new faces. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to touch a little bit on history. There's 96 years of history at the Tennessee Theater, and anyone who knows me well will attest that I could talk for hours about the Tennessee Theater. So I'm going to just touch on some history, and then I'm going to look toward the future. And so if we could just dim the lights just a little bit up here so we can get a better look at the screen, that would be awesome. There we go. Okay. Allison's going to help me out if I have any technology problems here. So by show of hands, is there anyone who has not been to the Tennessee Theater? Which is okay, no judgment, safe space. Okay. Well, we can get this young woman here to the Tennessee Theater. But you can really think about the theater in sort of several large blocks. This photo is from 1929. So the theater opened October 1st, 1928. And what the billed as the South Smoke Beautiful Theater. It showed movies 6 days a week, so closed on Sundays, and it only showed one movie at a time. And so you had three days of movies, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, another movie, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, start the cycle over again. So hundreds of movies were shown in those early years. There was also a stage built in the beginning, but the stage was really built more for vaudeville type acts, so small, one or two person performers, a comedian, maybe a juggler, not for large groups of musicians. I love this slide in particular because you may not be able to see it in the back, but there's a banner below the marquee that says, "First motion pictures of UT/Vanderbilt football game." So that would have been from the football game from 1928. This slide is from January 29. So, before we got to watch football on our televisions, they actually watched them at the Tennessee Theater. I wonder if Vanderbilt got lucky that year and also beat UT like they got lucky this week with Alabama. I don't know. But the theater did well, of course, opened just before the Great Crash and the Great Depression, but it did do well during the Depression. It was very important during World War II years to communicate information about what was going on across the pond through newsreels and such. I also like to point out, though, that the Tennessee Theater, while it made memories for many, many Knoxvillians and East Tennesseans, it was not necessarily, there were not happy memories for everyone in Knoxville because the Tennessee Theater was segregated when it opened, fully segregated. So if you were a Knoxvillian of color, you did not get to enjoy and make happy memories of the Tennessee Theater, not until 1963. So there were students from Knoxville College that peacefully protested outside the theater at the little kiosk there, wanting to buy tickets, were turned away for several months. And then in the spring of 1963, the Tennessee Theater was integrated. So I like to point that out when I do educational talks for children. For young folks, I think that time seems very, very far away, but it really wasn't that far away. But the theater enjoyed a very successful heyday all the way until about the early 1950s. Two things changed in the 1950s. First of all, the suburbs were being developed post-war and people were moving out further away from downtown, and smaller movie theaters were being built in those communities where people enjoyed the movies at those movie theaters. And then also, of course, the invention of television really did change the way that people consumed entertainment. And it didn't make sense anymore economically to have one movie screen in a giant space to show movies. So in 1972, the theater became a second-run film house. And then sadly, in 1977, November 3rd, 1977, the theater closed. Some of those of us who've been downtown or Knoxvillians for a really long time, maybe some of you remember that. Downtown Knoxville was very, very different in the 1970s, very quiet. Don't tell OSHA about this guy up here on the ladder there on the left. But so the future of the theater was really uncertain in the late 1970s. It was never as close to being threatened for demolition as the Bijou was. The Bijou was literally 2 months away from being torn down. But we do know that people came into the theater in the late 1970s, looked around and said, wow, look at all this wasted space. It's hard for me to even fathom someone thinking that. But there was someone who did not think that. In fact, he loved the Tennessee Theater and wanted to be sure to save it. His name was Jim Dick. And I know at least Towns Osborne, if not many of you know, Jim and Marilyn Dick were pillars of the community. Started Dick Broadcasting, which owned several different radio stations, most famously WIBK, AM and FM. So Mr. Dick was not a theater person, he was a radio man, but he loved his theater and wanted to be sure that it was preserved. So he bought the theater in '81. It was put in the National Register of Historic Places in April of 1982, just before the World's Fair. And he invested his own funds into the building, both sort of cosmetic improvements and some theatrical improvements, to make sure that the theater can function at least halfway as a performance center. So here's a picture from that year, 1983 or so. 85 was when, actually it's from 85, because that's when the symphony began performing at the Tennessee Theater. The opera began in 1983. But what you can't see from this picture is really how small the stage was. At least half of that orchestra and the conductor there in the front of the picture is sitting on an extension that extended well out into the seating area, just to have enough room to put all the musicians onto that tiny little stage. But that's how the theater operated from 1982 until 2003. Backing up just a minute, in 1996, Mr. Dick and his company had owned the theater for 15 years, never made money, not 1 year of those 15 years, lost money every single year. So when he was getting ready to retire and sell his business, he wanted to ensure the future of the Tennessee Theater. So he and other business leaders in the community got together and formed the Historic Tennessee Theater Foundation, a nonprofit organization, in 1996. So since 1996, we have been a nonprofit organization. That board, one of their first things to accomplish was to figure out how to preserve the theater long-term, make sure that it was going to serve future generations. So they embarked on a huge capital campaign. And think about this, these are 1999 numbers, 2000 numbers, about a $30 million project. The architect firm that did most of the design work was McCarty Holzapfel McCarty, and the construction manager was Denart Construction. Hey, Frank, in the back of the room, I love to always reminisce about those days with Frank. So it was a 19-month, $30 million project, and what resulted is this absolutely gorgeous historic treasure that we all get to enjoy now. This photo is from 2014. It's a rock and roll show called Ray LaMontagne. So we do about 40 to 50 of these touring shows, usually one-night shows throughout the year. We also do still continue to host the symphony, the opera, and the jazz orchestra. We're a very important venue for those larger performing arts organizations. We do 6 weeks, full weeks of touring Broadway now. We've done Broadway since 2008. One of the things that was changed about the theater to make Broadway possible was a huge stage extension that actually hangs out over the street behind the building, and a lot of backstage spaces as well underneath the auditorium that really transformed the theater into a more proper performing arts center. And then the front of the house areas were fully restored. All of the architectural wonders and details were preserved. So with the crowds came some new challenges. This is a shot from one of the events, I'm not even sure which one, but when we do have sold out shows, especially Broadway, when they're limited to 15 or 18-minute intermissions, guess what? We have long lines everywhere. We don't have enough bathrooms. Ladies, I know we now have 20 toilets for the ladies. In 1928, they only had 9. So I guess it wasn't proper for women to use the restroom in public or something, but, so we have these long lines. We have long lines at the concession stand. The lobby, while beautiful, is a little tight and doesn't really work for the sold out crowds. It's a great problem to have, but it was a problem that we wanted to find a solution to. Another thing that we want to do more of is developing future audiences. Many folks have come up to me, and my father was one who passed away actually 4 years ago today. But he told me about coming to the theater in the late, in the 1940s, and he would say things like, if you were serious about a girl, you took her to Tennessee. Children make memories differently today. They don't go to the movies as much as the older generations did. So we have tried to find ways to introduce the theater to this generation of children in new ways. So we do a lot more acting and theatrical centered things. We partner with different organizations. The slide on the top left is a Boys and Girls Club event. The slide on the lower right is a new program we have called the Marquee Awards, which is a high school musical theater competition where the winners get to go to New York City. Last year was our first year to do that. but we really have to be careful revenue-wise to not impact our ability to earn revenue on that main stage. So we are very choosy about when we shut down the stage to do these kinds of events. Just a couple of the stats that that I like to share about our education and outreach. You know, people think about us as a performance venue, which we are, but we are also serving a lot of people through educational opportunities. So well over 8,000 people come to free events every year. Mighty Musical Monday, which is a free organ concert, which we had yesterday, is one of the most popular. We gave away, or actually the theater purchased Broadway tickets for young people, over 500 tickets to various Broadway shows throughout the year. We educated over 300 folks in different master classes and workshops throughout the year. And then we partner with about 40 different community organizations. It might be a really strong, logical partnership like Boys and Girls Club, where they do their summer program at our theater, or it might be that we choose a nonprofit to make a donation to during the week of Broadway. But 40 different groups that we partner with throughout the year. So that's all about the past. Now I'm going to talk about the future of the Tennessee Theater. So with these space limitations, what were our options? What were the opportunities that we might have to find some more space? Well, lucky us, the building in the foreground, this white marble facade building, was known as the Mechanics Bank and Trust Building. It's located at 612 South K Street. So we're at 604. You can see there's actually a building in between, and I will come back to that in a moment. But in 2017, about 80% of that building came up for sale. And we started looking to see if the property would work for us. Before I go into how that works, that's an old historic shot of the building. I want to just talk a little bit about the history of this building. So the bottom 4 floors, which you can really only see 3 sets of windows, was built in 1907, and then the top 2 floors were added in 1923. In addition to being mostly a bank, Jack Neely did some great research for me. Other businesses in the building were a ticket office for Southern Railway, the headquarters of the Knoxville Badminton Association, the local chapter of the National Committee for Music Appreciation, and TVA had offices in this building, and the British War Relief Office was in this building. What's really interesting about this building is that in the 1950s, the top floor of this building was a radio station, WROL Studios. And a lot of very important musical luminaries performed live in this building in the early 1950s, such as Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, Archie Campbell, Carl and Pearl Butler, the Everly Brothers, and the Osborne Brothers. Who knows what the Osborne Brothers are famous for? Baraki Top, right. So they recorded that a little later than the 1950s, but they also performed in this building. In the 1980s, a pioneering preservationist named Christopher Kendrick, operated the first floor as a business club, the Old City Club, which is sort of a precursor to Club LeConte, and then also operated for a few years, or at least a short period of time, as the Orangery, when the Orangery had a fire in 1988. So really a fascinating history of this building. But this building, as I show here, is not next door to the theater. So how's it going to work for the Tennessee Theater? Well, it may not be next door at the front, but it is next door in the back. So imagine yourself going in the grand lobby of the Tennessee Theater there, the red area, and then the large area in the back is the auditorium. And there's a little carpeted foyer area outside the auditorium. Well, that carpeted foyer area is only 10 feet away from the east end of the 612 building. When we figured that out in 2018, and that the floors line up between the orchestra and the balcony levels of the theater, we said, we have to buy this building. So we very quickly raised the money, purchased the property, closed on the property in 2019. We spent all year doing design work. We submitted our drawings to the city for permitting to begin in March of 2020. So we all know what happened in March of 2020. We had to push the pause button on the project, delay a couple of years, which really gave us the opportunity, once we returned in late 2022, to revisit the project, make some changes to the design, had to restart the entire permitting process last summer in 23. We finally got our building permit in March of this year, and we started construction in April of this year. So if you walk down Gay Street, you may have seen a little bit of dust and some dumpsters and things like that out front. But we were really, really excited about how this property is going to enhance the activity at the theater. So the next slide is a video, and I'm gonna talk over it. There's just some background music, but it's gonna show how the buildings connect. This was done by drone footage, which is really cool. But if you come out of the auditorium and right at aisle 5, we'll bridge the gap between the buildings. And this will be a relatively small area, it's just a mezzanine level, that will be a private donor lounge. And that will be used not only for Tennessee Theater donors, but symphony donors, opera donors, whoever is using the building can cater to a smaller group of folks in this area. There'll be a private bar and private bathrooms in this area. But as I mentioned, we don't have enough toilets for the general public. So upstairs on the balcony level of the theater, we're gonna go around, it's a little dark, sorry, we're going up the stairs into the foyer area of the outside the auditorium. Instead of going into the auditorium, we're gonna turn around, go through the wall and into 3,600 square feet of space, which will be additional public restrooms, a fully serviced concession stand in the balcony as well, which we've never had. A lot of beautiful views, south views and Gay Street views out of all these windows. So the potential is really, really exciting to better serve all of our patrons for their theater experience by minimizing those lines and just providing more intermission and lounge space. Let's see, next. So here's a good view of each floor that we owned. It was pretty much looked like this when we bought it. They had already been gutted. But it was really fun to have a blank slate to kind of figure out what we were going to do. So other floor uses, the first floor on the left is as of today. On the right is our computer generated idea of what it will look like. We envision this to be a separate gathering space, pre and post show gathering for, again, for smaller groups of folks. And then this is, again, an artist rendering, sort of Star Trek-y. I promise it won't be that, that modern, but it won't look exactly like the theater decor. It's gonna have its own appearance. But this is that sort of smaller donor lounge area. There's not a great way to indicate the next level up of the bathrooms, but the level above that will be that rehearsal, education, outreach, sort of a wide open blank floor that can be configured in many, many different ways. We'll be able to serve, you know, children of Knoxville and all over East Tennessee, also enhance the activity of the Broadway shows, and they need rehearsal spaces as well. So lots of exciting things coming down the pipe. This is only the second time that I've made this particular presentation. I made it last night at the theater. I think I did better today than I did last night. But all that to say, the theater will be turning 100 in 2028. And I'm just so excited to think about how this project is going to set the theater up for the century and how it will continue to grow and evolve and be this beloved, beautiful venue that is unmatched anywhere, and yet also have a new life as a space with additional, you know, additional room to do more. So I talked really fast. I think I'm a little bit nervous, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you have about the history of the theater, or if there's any personal memories that people want to share. I love hearing those as well, or any questions about the renovation project that we have. Yes, ma'am.
Does the building have any relationship, I'm sorry, does the theater have any relationship with the Burwell building that basically sits, you know?
Yeah, let me go back to that survey slide, if I can. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, so the small white rectangle on the top side of that square is the Burwell building that was built in 1908. Okay, so again, think of sort of like a tall cereal box shaped building. And then when the developers, C.B. Atkin and Paramount Studios, built the Tennessee Theater in 1928, they added the section on the front. So where the marquee is, or the sign is, so the Burwell building is actually L-shaped, or sort of above and around the theater. So our lobby roof is open to the sky. It's unless you look at a Google, you know, pull up Google Maps and look at the satellite view, and you can see how the buildings are kind of, you know, wedded together. But it is a separate property, separately owned. It's a condo building now. We do share a firewall, so our fire protection talks to each other all the time. But other than that, it is a totally separate building. We have a permanent easement for our sign on their building. And they have a permanent easement of a fire exit out of their condos onto our roof. So it's a very nice relationship that we have. Yes?
From a historical standpoint, we moved here in 04.
Okay.
From Birmingham. So first time I went to the theater was right out of been renovated, went to an Alison Krauss show, which was spectacular. She was amazing. But I was struck by the fact it was the same Moorish design inside. So I quickly figured out the same architect or
Yes.
same design artist did both of them. The Alabama Theater seems to be a little bit larger.
Yes.
What other theaters share the same design or architect?
That is a
little
great
history?
question. Yeah, so that is one of the many, many details I skipped over, but the original architects were a company, a pair out of Chicago called Graven and Mager, Mr. Graven and Mr. Mager. And they only worked together as a partnership for about 15 months. They came from a much larger theatrical design studio called Rap and Rap that did dozens of theaters across the country. But in their short partnership, they only designed about 8 or 9 movie palaces or motion picture palaces. The Alabama was opened the year before the Tennessee in 1927. It is also known as Moorish Revival. It is larger than a theater. They are the only 2 left by Mr. Graven and Mr. Mager. When we had our 90th anniversary in 2018, the granddaughter of Graven, who lives in Bellingham, Washington, came to the Tennessee Theater. It was the first time she'd ever seen the building. And I'm actually getting choked up thinking about that, seeing her walk in and seeing her grandfather's work. But the idea behind motion picture palace architecture was not to be very artistically or architecturally pure. It was really about how can we wow the socks off of anybody who walks in the door. And so if you've been to the Fox in Atlanta, I think, is an atmospheric theater where you have the blue sky up above, or the Tampa Theater, which is right in the path of the hurricane coming, Milton. So that's another style. Some of the older theaters have more of a Baroque style, but there's not a lot of Moorish Revival architecture in theater that are left. There was a really beautiful one in Detroit called the Aztec Theater, and it was raised. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes, Virginia.
Yeah, can you explain how the Broadway show package comes together that y'all end up with every year?
So Broadway is our biggest revenue driver. It sort of pretty much is the boss of the calendar. We try to work everything around Broadway because it is so important to our bottom line. We do try to coordinate very closely with the symphony because they also require quite a few dates, and the opera as well. But opera is about 2 to 3 weeks out of the year. The symphony is about 8 to 10 weeks out of the year. So when we try to slot in those 6 weeks of Broadway, sometimes 7 when we do a 2-week run, we are starting years out. So we, of course, just announced our 24-25 Broadway season, which starts in December of this year. We already have penciled in, I'm pretty sure what we're gonna do in 25-26. And then we do have a few bigger shows held on the calendar just in pencil for beyond 2026. For a lot of the really big shows like Hamilton and Wicked, we worked on Hamilton for a decade. So basically, as soon as it started touring and left New York and touring productions went around the country, we started talking to the producers and said, we want you to come to Knoxville. Now, the Tennessee Theater is a very small Broadway roadhouse. It's only 1,600 seats. TPAC in Nashville is 2,400 seats. Most touring Broadway houses are 2,500 and up. And so, and Knoxville is a smaller market, right? We're not Milwaukee, we're not Nashville. So we had to kind of wait our turn, and those bigger shows take a little bit longer to get to us because of the revenue potential of 1,600 seats. So I say it's sort of like a cross between the New York Stock Exchange and air traffic control, because it's a scheduling issue and a money issue. And you know, both not only Broadway, but also the Alison Krauss shows and all that. People sometimes ask me, well, why are the ticket prices so high? That's all based on the cost of the show divided by 1,600. And the main driver of the cost of the show is paying the artist. So when you see a ticket that's, you know, $200, please don't be thinking the Tennessee Theater gets to keep those $200. We get about 15% of that. Most of it goes right out the door to either pay to put on the production or pay the artist making the production. Yes, sir.
What's the construction schedule for the new additions?
So McCarty Hall South was our design firm again. We were really thrilled to work with them. Our contractor is Jenkins and Styles. And again, they were both extremely patient in the sort of start and stop, no telling when this is gonna start, challenge that we had. But once we actually started construction in April, the original estimate was, I think, 12 to 15 months. I think we're gonna be more on the 15 to 18-month side. When you have an old building and you start peeling walls away, you always find surprises. So we're aiming right now, in fact, I did a press conference right before coming over here today. And our public, timeline says fall of 2025. I hope that means September and not November, but we'll see. Yes, Kim.
Some of my most fond memories as a child was being introduced to the arts. My mother taught me how to dress appropriately. We would go to Watson's and buy the clothing that I needed to wear. I would don my pearls, and we would, we'd go to Regus for our meal.
Wow, that's a pretty nice outing.
Oh, yeah, and then we would go to the theater, and what I learned was an appreciation for the arts, and not just who was on the stage or whoever was presenting. It was the building, it was the people who attended, it was this all-encompassing opportunity as a child. And now I'm like, there's tickets on sale, I'm buying them. In another breath, last year, Wicked, I took one of my friends who had seen the production in New York, and she said the production here was better than New York.
Well,
So-
that's very high praise. The touring actors that go around and do the shows, they're part of a union called Actors Equity, right? And so the quality of performer is the same pretty much across the board. It doesn't necessarily mean that the same actress, if Becky Hancock is playing Elphaba in New York, it doesn't mean that Becky's on the road, but whoever is playing Elphaba is of the same caliber, actor or actress. And so we are really lucky that these larger shows have the same quality, and sometimes people have a preference. I like this Elphaba better than the Elphaba I saw in New York City. I was lucky enough to see Hamilton in New York in 2018. And I liked our Hamilton here in Knoxville. There were actually 3 over a 2-week period. We had 3 different actors rotating the role, but I like the one that we had here in Knoxville better. So lucky us, right? Yes, sir.
I want to add, this is a counterpoint. I remember it best on Saturday afternoons, when we would come by bus all along. We didn't need parents in those days. We'd take the bus, have lunch at the Orange Julius, go to the Saturday afternoon matinees, which are usually Westerns and other awful things that we love, and sit in the balcony and throw things over the balcony.
These are the stories that I want. Keep talking.
Some of that for some of the younger people. I always liked the big thing in the ceiling. It attracted me, and I can't say I was ready for the arts, but I liked it.
We talk a lot about how the theater makes lifelong memories, and every memory is unique, and it contributes to this kaleidoscope of a history and a story. The stories that this theater has generated over the last 96 years. I mean, it is truly a privilege of mine to be able to hear stories like Ken's and like yours. And every time I stand in the lobby, people walk up to me, they see my name tag, and they just start talking. It is really great. I should probably just keep a little tape recorder in my pocket. Let me tell one story, and then I'll get to some more questions. When we were preparing for our 90th anniversary, we interviewed folks and asked them to share their memories on tape or audio, whatever. And there was a woman named Latrice Crippen, and she lived over in the area of town, which is now where the new Sentinel building is. And she would walk from her house to the theater. She would save her money by, what she told me, selling hot tamales that her grandmother made and washing front porches until she had enough nickels scraped together. She could walk to the theater, buy a candy bag, a nickel bag of candy across the street, and then a 25-cent movie ticket. And she said, I used to come in and look at the mirrors and pretend that I was Jean Harlow. And, those kinds of memories are just priceless. All memories are priceless. Tyler.
I was just gonna ask, what can we do, right? I'm sure that's part of your presentation, but how do we help you?
Well, actually, I'm gonna soft pedal that because I know you all are also a nonprofit. there is a slide at the end that just has a website address that you can go and read more about the project if you want. So that's all I'm gonna share with you all today, but, you know, yes, sir.
I saw Attack of the Killer Tomatoes in the
Yes,
theater.
okay.
That was fantastic. And you said 80% of that building. What's going on with the other 20%?
So we actually were able to negotiate with the top floor owner, and so we purchased 80% back in 2019. We just closed on the top floor in September. So September 10th, we closed. And so now we are figuring out how to integrate that floor into the overall programmatic use of the building. We're not ready. In fact, everybody, the media was asking this morning, what are you gonna do? And I said, I'm not ready to talk about that yet.
It's a finished residence, right?
No, it was a commercial condo. It was an office building, office suite. So we have plans for that, but those are not ready to share yet. Counts.
Does anybody remember Wallace Bowman?
Yeah.
Remember? Okay, his family owned Woodruff's. And Wallace Bowman was in love with the Tennessee Theater. And when they did the renovations, he was there every single day, monitoring everything that was renovated. You probably remember Frank.
She is not exaggerating. I was there, and Wallace's generosity paid for all of the beautiful paint and plaster restoration, all the decorative carpet, all the decorative curtains and draperies and soft goods, the Wurlitzer organ. And so if Wallace was gonna pay for it, he was gonna be involved in all the decisions, good and bad,
But
but
I also want to thank you. I think today's news and your program is one of the most exciting programs that our club has had.
oh, well, thank you, that's very kind. Yes, Susan?
I just wanted to say that you including the community is commendable. I remember when my dad was 90 or 95, you invited him and a bunch of people who had turned 90, and they sat and had lunch on the stage, and you gave them all gifts, and he came home and wanted to go to the Tennessee Theater every time there was a show. So that was just absolutely wonderful of you to do that.
That was my favorite event we did for the 90th anniversary. We said, all right, let's have a 90th birthday party and invite all the 90-year-olds in town. And we had a stage full, as many of you as there are you. We had, my dad was one. It was a wonderful event. We had birthday hats, we had cake. It was a lot of fun. So yes, thank you, Susan. Yes, ma'am.
I'm glad you brought up the Wurlitzer organ.
Okay.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. Again, another part I had to kind of cut out, but the Wurlitzer organ was installed in movie theaters, or Wurlitzer is a brand name, kind of like Kleenex, but the Wurlitzer organ at the Tennessee was installed at the time of the opening. And of course, it was designed to accompany silent film, right? The organist would sit at the console, watch the action on the screen, and make up music to go along with what was happening. What's interesting about the Tennessee's Wurlitzer is that between the design of the theater and the opening of the theater in 28, movies got sound. Oops. So the organ was immediately obsolete. And a lot of theaters removed their organs, you know, sent them off to pizza parlors and roller skating rinks. Ours was never taken out. It was retained and used instead as a pre-show entertainment, sort of a warm-up act for the movie. It was removed once, and so I say it was in the building for 95 years and not 96. Wallace underwrote a huge renovation of the Wurlitzer organ, where we shipped the console, which is the keyboard that you recognize, all the pipes behind the scenes, all the mechanics down in the basement, shipped it all to Reno, Nevada, to an organ builder named Ken Crone, where he fully restored the organ, got it back up to tip-top 1928 shape with some modern technological advances as well. Brought it back to the theater and reinstalled it in September of 2001. So one of the things they told us was, please be sure and use the instrument. Don't let it sit there and gather dust. What a tragedy that would be. So we started the Mighty Musical Monday program. Bill Snyder, it was his idea. And so we play the organ every first Monday of the month for a free noontime concert. So when you're not at Rotary, you can come down to the Wurlitzer and hear that. It does sometimes get bumped for Broadway now. We don't do it every single month. But otherwise, we do Mighty Musical Monday. So yes, we are very, very lucky to have the original instrument in its original installation at the Tennessee Theater.
And Freddie's been playing it since he was like 4 feet tall.
Right, so Bill Snyder was the volunteer organist, never took a dime to play that organ from 1979 until he retired at the theater's 90th anniversary in 2018. But he had an acolyte that followed him around literally, for a long time. And now Freddie Bratson is our house organist. And I'm also pleased to say that we have another young man in the wings who's Freddie's backup named Matthew Fisher. So, he actually works full-time in the theater. So the Wurlitzer organ is well set for the foreseeable future. I don't want to abuse my time. Do I need to go?
You're getting one or two
I've
more,
got
yeah.
one,
Okay, we'll take those two and then we'll be done. Go ahead, sir.
okay. I'd always wondered, I used to sit in the lower floor. There was somebody that hit me with an orange juice.
Well, now we know. Now we know.
He went here.
Oh, okay. My dad went to Knoxville High School and he had some of those stories too about, I think there was one that somebody brought a possum in and dropped it off the balcony. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, yes, sir.
There was a program for naming seats and plaques on those. I mean, that was very early on. When was that, did that occur?
That was part of our big $30 million renovation project from 2003 to 2005. We wanted to find a way to, have everybody take part. Not everybody can make a $100,000 gift, right? But those who could make a $500 gift or $1,000 gift, got to sort of sponsor, name a seat. So that was done at that point. We still have a few seats left, for sale. So that's sort of an ongoing, opportunity to donate to the theater. But we did that, back in 2005. Those plaques are still on there. If you can't remember where your plaque is, we have a database that shows us where they are. There's a lot of them.
I had my brother-in-law's father, he was 20 years old, and I put on those seats. That was a program that was done.
Before, okay. Yeah, those seats that you were sitting in today, those were brand new seats put in 2005, so we renamed all those seats. As you can tell, I love my job and I'm so fortunate to do my job every day. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you, and please come and say hello to me the next time you're at the theater. I'm often standing in the lobby at the base of the grand staircase, and forgive me if I don't remember your name, so please reintroduce yourself, but thanks again for the opportunity.
You have to agree with